Hi everyone, this is Nathan from Snap, and today we're going to be looking at how to make your surveys both dynamic and engaging, with a view to hopefully keeping your respondents interested enough to answer your questions and press submit at the end. It should take around about 35 minutes, and as ever, there is plenty of resources which I'll be pointing you to at the end. We're going to be using SnapXMP, our new seamlessly integrated platform, which has got three main components to it. Snap Desktop, which is installed on your PC or laptop, Snap Online, our cloud-based application, and for those of you who might be doing any field-based interviewing, so face-to-face interviewing, we have the Snap Offline Interviewer app. Today we're going to be focusing on Snap Desktop, although we can also do much of the design work that I'll be showing you today in Snap Online. We'll begin by looking at converting your standard checkbox and open questions into image-led questions by way of sliders, maps, and drag and drop question styles. We'll then look at adding some dynamic properties to your questions, which will help guide your respondents through the questionnaire. Answer validation is an important tool used to ensure that the data you get back is relevant data ready to analyse. It is also used to ensure that surveys and forms are as easy as possible to complete. And finally, I'll introduce you to a new feature called Initial Value and show you some of the uses for it. So the aim today really is to move away from your standard questionnaires and look to make the surveys more interactive, dynamic and engaging. Okay, let's head into the software. I'm going to be dipping in and out of a few different surveys today to try and give a few different types of examples of how these features could be implemented. I'll start by going into the undergraduate survey, where we're going to spend a bit of time looking at how to make your questions more image-led. If we look at question 11 to begin with, which is a standard tick box question, or a rating scale question, and from the topics menu I will choose show, and we're going to show that question as a slider control. We do give you a number of different ones which are pre-built into Snap. I'm actually going to go down and choose one of the smiley ones near the bottom. And pretty much that's all there is to it. You can see as I slide up and down, the images change. Now there is the option for advanced, and within there we have the option to change the colours of these smiley faces or indeed produce a different image. You've also got the option to manually reassign the code labels to the relevant image, but today I will leave it as it is. You can see down the bottom I've got a number of different editions, so the PC, laptop, tablet, phone and paper edition, and it's worth just pointing out that the changes we're making at the moment, these are formatting changes, so that will only affect the edition that we're on. So that gives you the option, if you wanted to have maybe a slightly different slider for the tablet, perhaps leave the phone as it is. And of course the paper survey will always be a standard tick box question. Just moving back into my PC laptop edition, you can see I've also got a different type of slider for question 9. Now question 9 is actually an open-ended question, a quantity response question. And if I just double click on the slider, we can then have a quick look at the preview. So as I'm dragging across, you can see it's populating the box at the side. So that was a slider where you drag a handle across a screen or up and down. I would err on the side of caution though, as you may find that some of your respondents don't find that to be such an easy manoeuvre. A similar idea, but one that works in a slightly different way, is a map control, and I'd suggest that this perhaps is a little bit easier for the respondent to use, as they're simply tapping an image, so there's no sort of sliding involved. And I'm going to do this for question number 8. So at the moment it's a grid question, so if I highlight that question, again, go up to show, and this time we will set this to be a map control. So if I go across to file and load map control, again we do give you a few to begin with, so 5 stars, 10 stars, gender, some emoji ones, maps of the UK and US, but initially I'm going to go with one of the emoji ones. And if I go down to the preview tab, you can see that this time it's just a case of tapping or poking an image rather than having to slide. You still can slide if you want to, but yeah, it's just easier just to poke. I'm actually going to go back and choose a slightly different one though, so File and Load again, and this time I will choose 5 stars medium. And in terms of size, whether you're doing a survey on a phone, a tablet or a PC, 5 stars medium should be about right for each. Again, if I just do a quick preview, you can see it's nice and easy. So that was how to make use of a pre-built map control. What we're now going to do is look to upload our own image and create a map control from scratch. So if I go onto my desktop, you can see I've got an image which was created in Photoshop or something equivalent. It looks like 4 separate images, but actually it's just one big image, and we're going to upload that to Snap and then tell Snap that that's answer number 1, that's answer number 2, etc, etc. So if I move back into the survey, and we're going to do that for question number 7. So again, we will show it as a map control. And this time, rather than loading a map control, we will import an image. So it's on my desktop. Across the top we've got a number of different shapes that we can choose from, so these are all rectangular or square, so I'm just going to click and drag, and that's my option number 1. And because these are all the same shape and size, I'm just going to right click and copy, and then we can just paste that in. I can then use my arrows just to realign it. So now that I've drawn my shapes, I can then right click on each of them and assign them to code. So this is just pointing back to the labels within the questionnaire. And then across the top we've got a number of different formatting options, weird and wonderful, most of them being weird, so I certainly wouldn't recommend the oil painting one. So initially I'm going to do Control A to highlight all my different shapes, and today I'm just going to make use of the filter. And my survey is a sort of dark red colour, so I'm going to choose the dark red here. Obviously ideally you'd go into more colours and choose your sort of RGB settings. I'm also going to get rid of the outline yellow, so if I go into the pencil, and I could try and match up the colour, or I could just turn it off completely. Again, if I could then go into the preview, question 7 was a multiple response question, so I can actually choose as many options as I like. Now, just thinking about my phone edition, we're obviously dealing with a much smaller screen size, so something a bit more like this. So if I was going to use a map control for this one, realistically I'd probably want to consider uploading a different image. So today I'm going to double click on it, and for the phone edition I will import a different image. It's just warning me that I've already drawn some shapes. I'm now about to sort of upload a different image which will then delete all those shapes, so that's fine. And I've got a slightly different image for that one, which obviously a little bit smaller, but more importantly it's going across only 2 and then down 2. So obviously I need to then go in and draw some shapes, but I'm not going to worry about that today, so I'll just click OK. Again, it's just warning me that I haven't actually finished this yet, but I'm just going to click OK anyway. So that was an example of making use of images to make your questions more engaging and interactive, and they were using sort of fairly standard images. If I now move into a survey I've prepared already, you can see that map controls is just a nice way of presenting your questions, so it doesn't need to be sort of traditional images. So if I just do a quick preview of this one. So this survey is using map controls, but it's just using pictures which are actually words. So which school year are you in? Again, this is a multiple response question. And then we've got the emoji one that we looked at earlier. Okay, our final interactive question style is drag and drop, and for this one we're going to move into another survey, this time the communication survey. I'll go ahead and preview it to show you it in action. So question 1's asking me to rank these options in order of 1 to 5, and it's just a case of taking the options on the left, dragging them across the screen. You can see I've got the option to reorder them if I wish. I can put options back, choose a different option. And the nice thing about this question style is it actually helps the person filling it in. So when I'm looking at the last two, I don't need to worry about the 3 that I've already chosen. We're just saying of these 2 remaining ones, which is my preference. If I move back to the questionnaire in Snap, we can see that it starts off as a grid question. If I go to show again, and this time it's drag and drop. And if I take the tick out the show box, you can see that there's 5 options across the top, 5 categories down the side, and it's set to rank. If I move back to the preview and move on to the next question. So here we've got a number of different options down the left hand side, and it's just a case of taking those options and deciding which category they might fall into. So really it's just an interactive rating scale question. If we move back into the questionnaire and look at the question, you can see that as before it starts off as a grid question set to drag and drop, but this time set to categorize. So last time it was set to ranking, this time categorize. Again, if I take the show off, you can see we've got 5 options across the top and various options down the side. The final example ensures that I can only choose a maximum of 3 categories. So as I start moving the options across, again I can reorder them as I wish. When I then go to do a 4th option, it doesn't let me, but I could remove one and then choose a different one in its place. Looking at the survey back in Snap, again it's a grid question set to drag and drop ranking, so like the first one, the difference being in the first one we had 5 options across the top and 5 down the side. Here we've got 3 across the top and as many as you like down the side. So that was drag and drop using words. If I move into a different survey now, you can see I've got exactly the same idea, but this time I've got images. So just inserted images, so just like you'd insert your logos in place of the code labels. I'm going to move back to the original questionnaire now, and we're going to look at adding some dynamic properties to some of the questions. And the easiest way to do that is just to right click on a question and variable properties. We're going to do a number of different things for this question. First thing I'm going to do is order this list alphabetically. So under ordering, we've got various options, one random and the other alphabetic. What I do want to make sure though is that none of the above remains at the bottom. So I will ask it to exclude option number 8. This question's a multiple response question, so people can choose as many options as they want at the moment, but I'm going to restrict it to a maximum of 3. And I want to make sure that if anyone chooses none of the above, they're not able to choose anything else. So option number 8 will be exclusive. So if I was to choose nightlife, location, and then none of the above, it will automatically remove the previous ticks. For question number 2, I'm going to set it up so whatever they choose in question 1 will be the only options available in question 2. So again, right click variable properties, and we're going to make use of a feature called mask. Now for this one in my head, this feels a little bit back to front because when I think of the word mask, I think of hiding, as in hiding behind a mask. Well, actually it means to show or display. So we want to show or display the options which were chosen in question number 1. So we just type in Q1. For question number 3, I want Snap to display the options which were chosen in question number 1, but to hide the options which were chosen in question number 2. So again, right click, variable properties, and we're going to go down to mask. And remember it means show or display, so we want to show the options which were mentioned in question 1, but I don't want the options which were mentioned in question 2. So a little bit like the drag and drop that we looked at earlier, masking allows us to guide the respondent by removing the options which are no longer relevant to them. And I could take it a step further by adding auto answer to this question. So that means if there's only one remaining answer left, Snap will actually skip over that question, so a little bit like routing, but what it will also do is answer that question on their behalf. So when it comes to the analysis side of things, it will be as if that person had seen the question and ticked that answer. Moving down to question number 4. Earlier we looked at drag and drop to allow people to rank things in order of 1 to 5. We can do a similar sort of thing for question 4, but this time we're going to do it using rating check. So this will ensure that each person can only choose one option down that column and one option down that column. If we now turn our attention to some open-ended questions and start looking at validation. Now, open questions are very useful for getting real insight into individuals' thoughts and opinions, as well as perhaps picking out some sort of personal details such as postcodes, zip codes, and maybe email addresses. But with them being open-ended questions, they are very much open to any kind of response, and as you've no doubt experienced at some point, often when you get your data back, it's not really good for anything. Either that, or you need to spend considerable time cleaning the data up after the survey's closed. So that's where validation comes in, because the data is checked before the person presses submit. And a good example of that might be looking at our email address question, where we can apply a pattern. So if I right click and variable properties, and we have patterns. So if I drop down the menu, there's various patterns that we give you by default, plus you can create your own. But initially, if I go into email address. So this will ensure that the response includes an @ symbol in the middle, as well as something before that and something after that, and that it ends with a dot and something else at the very end. So a respondent could still make up an email address, but they would need to ensure that it has the correct sequence of characters. Another example of this would be question number 5, where we're asking people to type in a percentage. Some respondents might type in just a number, whereas others might type in a number followed by a % symbol. So rather than shouting at them, we can simply apply a pattern to exclude the % symbol when it comes to the analysis. So for this one, I will choose a pattern and we'll go with percentage. To take a closer look at patterns and what they do and how they work, if we go up to Tailor and Patterns, these are all the patterns which we provide you with. Again, you can actually create your own. You can see we've got a number of different ones in there, but I'm going to have a look at the postcode UK. You can see there's also a Canadian one and a couple of US ones for the zip codes, but if I double click on the postcode UK, so a postcode is made up of an area, a district, potentially a space in the middle, so 0 or more spaces, followed by a sector and a unit. And if I go into test, I can actually check to see how it works. So if I start typing in a postcode, so the area is 1 or 2 letters, the district is always a number, there's potentially a space in the middle, but I'm not going to worry about that today. The sector is always a number, and then the unit is always 2 letters. So you can see that's a match, so Snap's happy with that, what I've typed in. If I type something different in, it becomes a no match. Assuming it is a match though, you can see what it's actually done is tidy that data up in the background. So postcodes in the UK are generally done in uppercase and normally with a gap in the middle. So again, rather than shouting at your respondents and forcing them to do things in a really specific way, we can just be grateful that they've answered the question in the first place and then get Snap to tidy up the data in the background. Let's move back to question 5. So we're expecting percentages here, and really percentages shouldn't go above 100. So for question 5, A, B and C, if I go into the variable properties, and I'm going to set a valid range. So it shouldn't be anything less than 0, and it shouldn't be anything more than 100. Just note that if you are going to use a symbol instead of the word to, it's the tilde or the wiggly line. And for question 5D, I'm going to make use of a new feature called initial value. So 5, A, B and C are 3 percentages. I'm then going to calculate what that total is. So for initial value, I'm going to take question 5A and add that to question 5B and add that to question 5C. So that will give me a total. I want people to be able to see that total but not edit it, so I will set that to read only, and the total should be 100. I'm doing a very similar process in question 10. So here I'm taking the values from question 9A, B and C, and just going into the paper survey you can see that they are quantity response questions. And also just note that these are asking for people to say their weekly spend, and then I'm using a derived variable to total those up and insert the text into question 10. So if we go and have a look at the derived variable, so V10, and as I did before, it's just taking those three questions, so Q9A, added it to Q9B and Q9C. I said they are weekly figures. I'm then timesing it by 4.3 to give me a monthly figure. I save that and go back into the design window and come back down to question 10. The answer to V10 has then been inserted into the question text of question 10. Okay, the final thing I wanted to show you today is how initial value can also be used as a way to precede an answer. Now, you might be aware that answers can be seeded into a survey via an uploaded database, allowing you to send out targeted email invitations and reminders. And questionnaires can also be preceded by way of adding additional information to the end of the questionnaire URL. And that can be useful if perhaps people are scanning a QR code on a poster, and built into the QR code would be the location of that poster, so perhaps whether it's in the car park or the front entrance, etc. But using initial value, we can seed a question without doing either of these things. Now, to give a couple of examples which perhaps aren't the best, but they do at least show you how initial value can work, I'm going to look at question 1, and let's take a requirement that we might want it to default to none of the above. So if I right click and go into variable properties, and using initial value we can literally say 8. So when that page loads it will already have a tick in none of the above. I'll leave it as read only no, so the person, the respondent, can still change that, but that's the default answer. Or if I perhaps come down to my email address question, so question number 10, you might have a requirement that you wish to have some text preceded into there. So today in speech marks I'm going to add overtype your email address here. So as I said, perhaps not the best examples, but I just wanted to show you how you can make use of these. So you can either use codes, so the positions, or like I've done here, you can use words. So I'm actually going to cancel out of that one. And I've got an example which takes it a step further. Today I'm taking an example where this is an interviewer-led questionnaire, with the interviewer ultimately deciding if this person needs a follow-up consultation. But based upon a couple of answers previously given, the survey is going to guide the interviewer. In my example I'm going to be taking the result of question 5C and also the result of question 13. Question 13 is a tick box question with 11 options in there, and then question 5C is the quantity response question that we looked at earlier, the percentage question. So I'm going to say anyone who spends at least 50% or more doing outside learning, or anyone who chooses one of the more negative options for question 13, in which case I want it to default to a yes. Alternatively, I will default to a no. And as I said, to do this I'm using a derived variable. So if I go into my variables window and come down and look at seed Q14. So as I said, for question 5C, the quantity response question, if the figure typed in there is 50 or more, so greater or equal to 50, or if question 13, the tick box question, is one of the more negative options, this derived variable will produce a number 1. And if it's not one of those options, so just making use of the word not, it will produce a number 2. If I close that down and go back into the questionnaire and look at question 14, and go into the variable properties. You can see I've typed in seed Q14. So when the survey is completed, the calculation will take place. Seed Q14 will produce a number 1 or a number 2. So a number 1 being yes, number 2 being no. Okay, so we've obviously made lots of changes. Let's do a quick preview and see some of this in action. So looking at question number 1, you can see it's already defaulted to none of the above, and it's also alphabetical. If I start selecting some options, you can see the masking that we put on question 2 and 3 is working. If I then choose accommodation, accommodation disappears from question number 3. Now ideally we'd want to probably put page breaks in here rather than having things flashing around on screen, but just from a demonstration purposes today it's quite useful to see it all happening in front of you. Question 4, we put the ratings check on, so I might decide that for me it's all about location, followed by nightlife and the student experience. But if I try and choose number 2 again, you can see it tells me I can only choose one option. For question number 5, it will be adding up my values. And if you remember, for question 14, the very last question, it's going to be making use of whatever value I put in here. So I've typed in a number less than 50, so at the moment it should be defaulting to no when we get to the very last question. We have our map control that we did earlier. You can see my drive variable calculating my figures from above, and as I said, these are weekly figures. It's done some sums in the background to create a monthly figure. And I said if I choose one of the positive options, the next question, question 14, should default to a no, which it has done. If I now go back and choose one of the negative options, it should then default to a yes. Okay, so that was everything that I was planning on showing you today. Hopefully there's been a couple of things in there which you'll be able to make use of to make your surveys more dynamic, engaging, and hopefully to improve your response rates, as well as making sure that your data is ready to analyse. As mentioned previously, there is plenty of additional resources out there, including a couple of the how-to guides which I've put up on screen now, which are available on our support hub. And of course, do remember that we are always on the end of the phone or email, whether that's accessing our help desk or perhaps booking onto one of our training courses. If you're short of resources or would just like a helping hand, our research department can assist you with any aspect of your project, from simple data entry jobs right through to complete project management. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll hopefully see you again soon.